And I'll Good afternoon, everyone. The October 31st work session of the County Board is now in session. Today's topic is our solid waste management plan, which also functions as the furtherance of Arlington's zero waste strategy. Happy Halloween, and on this day, we should also note it's the day of the birth of our communications manager. Happy birthday, David Barrera. And we will begin our work session. Anybody during the course of this afternoon's conversation, if you can work in a Halloween appropriate pun, all the more points to you.
Oh, the manager's got one already, I'm sure.
Yeah, he's been working hard, right? Well, you can always default to using wicked to describe anything that is heard.
Yeah, well, that's because I'm from Boston. I can't
Exactly. But just to orient everyone, today's conversation is going to be to hear an update on the work that staff has done, not only among themselves, but also engaging the committee of interested citizens involved in furthering our zero waste strategies. And they're going to seek some feedback from us on some near and long-term policy ideas. And we're all ears to all of the great stuff we're about to hear. Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this. We'll be back to you, to the board in the spring for adoption. But since there's so much work that's gone into it, we wanted to check in with the community and with you. I'm going to turn it over to Doug Kriedemeyer, who's going to do the presentation. I have Eric Grabowski with me and also Adam Rydell. But without further ado, over to you, Doug.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, board members, for joining us this afternoon to go over the draft plan so far. Next slide. So the focus of today's presentation is to present an overview of the draft plan and to focus on the short-term initiatives and then briefly focus on the mid and long-term initiatives as well. Next slide, please. So planning and development got underway in February of 2022 with the Solid Waste Committee, which is chaired by a member of C2E2, and was expanded for this process to include members representative of the Arlington community. Then in May of 2022, the Solid Waste Bureau hosted 2 virtual town halls to obtain initial input from the community, which helped shape the direction of the zero waste initiatives. Then at the end of September, the Solid Waste Committee approved the draft plan for public comment. And that brings us to today's work session. There's still a handful of months and steps remaining in the process, and I'll cover those next steps at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So the current solid waste management plan was developed in 2004, and I wanted to highlight the many accomplishments that originated from that plan. It allowed the county to increase its recycling rate by 20.6% to 52.3% in calendar year 22, surpassing the plan's goal of a 47% recycling rate by 2024. It expanded and right-sized curbside collections and introduced programs that have created a strong foundation as we move into the future. These accomplishments demonstrate the actionability of a solid waste management plan. And so we approach the development of this plan in the same mindset. Next slide, please. As the planning process began, we knew that there were 2 main purposes that the plan needed to fulfill. First was to meet the Virginia state requirements for a solid waste management plan, and then second, to create a roadmap to fulfill the county board's 2015 zero waste resolution, which established the goal of diverting 90% away from landfilling and incineration by 2038. Next slide, please. As part of the state requirements, planning period projections help inform and ensure adequate disposal capacity for the county as we look into the future. Waste generation is projected to increase in line with CPHD's projected population and job growth over the same period, or roughly 25%, or 2,000 tons annually from 2020 through 2045. The Cavanna Waste to Energy facility has a fixed processing capacity, and uncertainty surrounding the facility's future post-2038 was considered. So we aim to minimize waste disposal by then by focusing on reallocating the waste stream management outcomes And the plan's efforts to encourage recycling and organics diversion should ensure future disposal capacity for county-generated waste and options to future boards regarding the facility's future. To determine existing opportunities, audits of trash and recycling carts were conducted for the residential, multifamily, and commercial sectors, where the materials are sorted into categories. And so on this slide, every colored section of the pie chart represents materials that have existing or potential disposal alternatives other than waste to energy. These sections should be as small as possible, with trash composing majority of the cart. And so within the trash cart, more than 2/3 of material in the multifamily and commercial trash could be diverted towards other outlets. Food waste, indicated in the darkest green shade, has also been determined to be the biggest opportunity for diversion across all three sectors within the Arlington. Next slide. So as I just mentioned, food waste represents the largest opportunity for diversion. Here's a few figures from an EPA study that analyzed food waste generating sectors and the management flows of wasted food. Now, this is a national study, but the figure on the right provides a great visualization of the management flows. It's these flows and these outcomes that the county needs to focus on reallocating so that we're minimizing waste sent to the waste to energy facility and maximizing recycling and food recovery outcomes. So for the recycling cart, most of this chart should consist of the blue colored sections. Anything else would be considered contamination within the recycling stream. And looking at this data, ample opportunity again exists to improve recycling within the multifamily and commercial sectors due to the high contamination rate. Residential curbside recycling performance is quite high, and this is mainly due to the Solid Waste Bureau's oversight and consistent messaging that allows us to perform that high within that sector. Now, combining all of the data from the previous slides, this presents a broad look at the materials comprising the county's trash and recycling streams. It tells us that the county has a robust and comprehensive management system in place. And you can see that through some additional organics regulation within the multifamily commercial sectors, which is not currently in place. And if we had everyone participate 100% using the proper disposal mechanisms, that we could divert up to a 78% of the county's waste currently. It's these insights that helped us inform the plan's voluntary programs and initiatives. Next slide. Because of the dual purpose, it recommends two categories of goals, mandatory and aspirational. The mandatory goals are written to satisfy the Virginia state requirements, and the aspirational goals are not enforceable by the state, but are voluntary actions that the county may take to achieve the 90% diversion goal. And these will be discussed in the upcoming slides. So 90% is an aspirational goal. There are several jurisdictions across the US that have been working at this longer than we have and are still striving to reach that milestone. So the plan proposes 15 voluntary program enhancements or initiatives, 4 policy programs, as well as 3 intermediate diversion goals to gauge our process as we move forward into the future. So the voluntary program enhancements were developed by the Solid Waste Committee and Solid Waste Bureau staff with input from public comments and the consultant. Each program was evaluated to understand the potential impacts in 3 areas. First was the diversion impact, or the potential to move the county's overall recycling rate towards its goal. Greenhouse gas emissions impact were calculated to account for the management flow changes of waste materials. And this is measured in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, or MTCO2e, which you'll see on the following slides. And then lastly, financial impacts to the county over the 20-year planning period. Now, these are planning level estimates and may not reflect the actual cost for implementation once we get to those points. These 3 factors, along with the waste management hierarchy, were considered when prioritizing into short, medium, and long-term timeframes. Most of the initiatives are going to be front-loaded into the short and medium term, This is because many of them focus on influencing resident behavior and changing their management practices. And the longer we wait to begin, the more difficult it becomes to attain 90% diversion within the specified timeline. So there are several other factors influencing implementation of the voluntary actions. Resources and factors such as infrastructure and regional capacity may be needed to develop to support these programs. State legislation and other regulations may also need to be enacted or amended before we can move forward. So the pursuit of zero waste is not an easy endeavor. The plan recommends additional staff, funding for program costs, infrastructure, marketing and educational materials, grants and subsidies, as well as a potential retrofit of the waste-to-energy facility so that it may remain operational post-2038. There are existing funding streams that could be adjusted to account for the new programming expenses. Some program fees may offset the proposed expenses, and then there are additional funding streams to be explored as we move forward. Next slide. With that in mind, I'll move into the short-term implementation timeframe. This timeframe is set for 2024 through 2029. There are 7 initiatives slated for this period. The first 4 initiatives are proposed to begin in fiscal year 25, and they're currently going through the budget process, but have not yet been approved. And as with all the initiatives, the exact timing of implementation is proposed and may be adjusted based on budgetary processes and approvals. Expanding education and outreach capacity was identified as the highest priority for the short term. The county can have the largest impact on diversion by improving participation and utilizing the existing programs, as we saw from the waste audits in the previous slides. It's estimated that we could increase overall diversion by 14 to 16.5%. And it's the largest impact of all the initiatives identified. It aims to expand the Solid Waste Bureau capacity by recommending 2 FTE marketing and education specialists, as well as an annual budget for developing educational materials and multimedia campaigns focused on recycling right for consistent and continual messaging. The cost of hiring the FTEs is only included here, but the positions would support several of the other initiatives identified in the plan. The second initiative focuses on waste reduction, material reuse, and donation. And these are the top tiers of the waste management hierarchy. The goal is to reduce waste before it enters the waste stream by encouraging the donation and reuse of goods and materials that still have a useful life instead of disposing of them. Through these efforts, it's estimated that the county would be able to add 3 to 3.7% to the overall diversion rate. This initiative, as I just mentioned, would be supported by the 2 FTEs, and it proposes an annual budget to create waste reduction campaigns separate from the recycling right campaigns mentioned in the previous initiative. So establishing 2 new glass drop-off locations within the high-density areas of National Landing and Roslyn-Ballston corridor would make recycling glass more convenient for the multifamily and commercial entities located within those areas. Estimated costs include purchasing additional collection containers and staff time to service these new locations, and establishing them would increase the overall diversion by 1 to 1.3%. The last initiative proposed for fiscal year 25 proposes increasing the monthly fee for households that have 2 or more black trash carts to align the monthly fee with disposal costs of the additional waste generation. This is a variation on a pay-as-you-throw system and increases the fee for each additional trash cart from $2 to $10 per month, while leaving the fee for additional recycling and organics carts at $2 per month. This monthly charge would capture roughly half of the disposal costs, but provides the right disincentive for additional generation while encouraging more recycling and organics diversion throughout the county. It's estimated to increase diversion by approximately 1.4%. And the cost associated with this is for targeted outreach to the impacted residents approximately twice a year to provide them information on why it's there and what they can do moving forward, what their options are. So organics diversions at farmers market. This moves past the fiscal year 25, but still within the short-term timeframe. It aims to collect leftover food and non-sellable produce from farmers markets to divert the material in line with the food recovery hierarchy. Costs include annual support services to develop the program and partnerships. And I will note that there is an estimated increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And this is also going to be the case with the other organics diversion programs. And this is because of the diversion away from waste to energy, but we're still diverting those materials to a higher secondary use. Development of a Center for Hard to Recycle Materials or CHARM facility is another short-term initiative. Initially, it would allow consolidation of multiple existing drop-off services that the county currently offers to include the Household Hazardous Materials Program, a single-stream recycling drop-off and glass drop-off, and would allow for future collection of hard-to-recycle materials all in one place. The specific materials to be accepted would be decided upon in the future, but may include things such as mattresses, carpet, styrofoam, or plastic films. And these estimates don't include the funds for facility construction or retrofit, which may certainly impact the implementation timeline for this program. The final short-term initiative is organics diversion for multifamily residential and commercial properties by incentivizing the voluntary introduction of these programs. Through direct technical assistance and support, the county could increase diversion by 3.3 to 4.4%. And again, as I just mentioned, organics away from waste to energy is going to increase greenhouse gas emissions, but remain the most environmentally beneficial strategy. Looking at the cumulative impacts over the short term with those 7 initiatives, the first 4 proposed to begin in fiscal year 25 at an estimated $511,000 in ongoing costs based on the planning level estimates, and again, do not reflect the actual request. The other 3 short-term actions would add approximately $226,000 in ongoing costs. It would allow the county to reach a net reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of approximately 116,000 metric tons, or the equivalent of removing almost 26,000 gas-powered passenger vehicles from the road every year. And it has the potential to add 24.9 to 30.1%, raising the overall recycling rate to 73.9 to 79.1% by 2038. Next slide. Because the other initiatives are further out on the planning horizon, they are summarized here. Implementation for the medium-term actions would occur between 2029 and 2034 and are the top 4. And then the long-term policy programs are the bottom 4. There's also a handful of other actions identified in the medium term, which aren't listed here, which have no measurable impact on the overall diversion goal, but still have positive benefits and help foster a zero waste community. These add approximately $277,000 in ongoing annual costs, contribute to a net reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of approximately 32,000 metric tons, or the equivalent of removing 7,000 gas-powered vehicles from the road, and adds another 11.2 to 12.7% to the overall diversion goal by 2038. The timeframe for the policy and legislative programs ranges from 2024 through 2038. And this is because the county lacks direct control over the implementation of these programs and would need to begin advocating for these programs once the plan's adopted at the state or federal levels in order for them to move forward. So then this more clearly depicts how all of the initiatives that I've outlined so far contribute towards that 90% diversion goal. Some of the initiatives have been consolidated here for the ease of presentation, but it creates a strong foundation and roadmap to move the needle towards that 90% goal. So then next slide, please. Here's a more comprehensive look at the implementation schedule of all the initiatives with corresponding ongoing costs by fiscal year. Again, this slide only represents the planning level cost estimates and not the actual budget request. And ultimately, the board has the flexibility and control over the implementation timeline as we move forward. Slide. So I mentioned earlier the ample opportunities that exist within the multifamily and commercial sectors to reduce recycling contamination and the potential for food waste diversion. So I wanted to quickly highlight a couple of the multifamily commercial targeted initiatives that specifically address these areas, and to note that this is where some of those program costs can be applied. Next slide. As with any endeavor, identifying the key strategies for success is necessary to reach a successful outcome. And pursuing zero waste, a whole system approach is necessary and needed at the producer, consumer, and leadership levels. The draft plan addresses each of these in various ways through the voluntary actions identified in the plan. Next slide. And so as we look towards the future and the next steps, tomorrow we'll begin the start of the plan's public comment period and run through December 1st. The Solid Waste Bureau is going to kick it off by hosting 3 virtual town halls open to the public on November 1st and 2nd, 2 evening meetings and 1 daytime meeting. We'll be using an online tool to collect the public's feedback throughout that period, and then we'll meet to review that with the Solid Waste Committee after that period is closed. We'll continue discussion of short-term budgeting recommendations for fiscal year 25. And then lastly, like Mark mentioned, we'll bring the draft plan before the board this coming spring for adoption. Next slide. And I'd like to thank you all for your time and then welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And just, if we could, why don't we just stay on slide 26 as the default? There we go. Of course, colleagues, anything else you want to refer to, you're welcome to, but this might inspire some discussion and conversation. Anyone like to begin? I'll start us off, or Ms. Talento,
Yeah,
please.
you want to go first?
I have no preference. I was just going to, not deal with the lengthy silence. So my top line question concerns the recycling rate. I mean, it was great work for us to exceed our 2024 target. But if memory serves, we actually did so a fair number of years ago. We actually eclipsed the 47% like in 2014. So if we take the period from 2014 to the current, it seems that we've had a bit of a plateau. And if you could just give a sense of what you think the true opportunities for growth are, or what has limited the rate of growth in the last 8-9 years.
So with that, one of the things I'll mention is that the state does give us 5% bonus points for some of the existing programs. So that's added to the diversion rate from the state. And so as we look and have continued to move forward over the last several years is, filling in the gaps with organics and food waste diversion, trying to reduce the overall waste generation within the county. Those are going to be the largest opportunities as we look forward, is really getting people to change their habits and behaviors and making more conscious decisions when they're out buying something or purchasing goods moving forward.
So I think
Mr.
also
Grabowski?
the fact that typically you get the biggest jump when you have a new program implementation. So in 2016 is when we introduced the green organics cart. So we saw a jump at that point. And so it wasn't until basically 2 years ago now that then we started with food scraps. So we're hoping we'll see another. But there just isn't organic growth unless there's something changing the behaviors of people. So because, again, from 2016 to 2021, that period of time where you saw that growth sort of stagnate is because the program stagnated. Now, during that time, we did do a better job in the multifamily sector as far as compliance with the rules as far as the multifamily requirements, that they have a system in place. The challenge with the multifamily is whether people use it appropriately. And again, we saw by the slides that people aren't necessarily. So that's why we think more education and marketing targeted towards that community may be that thing that jumpstarts us in the future to get better results.
And if I could just explore that piece, because that was sort of the follow-up question. I love the recycling right approach, because clearly a lot of people are doing it wrong. Do you have any sense of whether or not that's because of ignorance, as it appears some of the marketing and education policies are designed to address, or are there deeper factors like it's just easier for people to do the wrong thing as opposed to the right thing?
So the Recycling Partnership actually studied this and looked at it in depth. And they say there are really three factors for consideration. The first is access, having the system. So the county has systems. So everybody has access to recycling across the board. Then it's the knowledge piece, which you're indicating, do people know how to, is this recyclable in fact or not? The study also shows that about 49% are just believers in doing it right. They just want to do, but which means 51% you have to coalesce in a different way. And that's where it sort of gets to this engagement piece, because then you're really changing the fundamental things about their core beliefs, what they value, those kind of things, which are just harder for people to take on and become part of their daily lives. So it's really those three factors: access, knowledge, and ultimately engagement, which makes a difference. And right now we're to the point where we need to focus on engagement, and that's why marketing, education, those things are critically important.
Thank you. Ms. Talento.
I have a few questions, so I will start and then can come back. But a couple of clarifying points. I do want to get back to access in multifamily, but just can you explain on slide 10, there's an asterisk that says it excludes county and APS facilities. Can you explain the reason for that? Is there a contracting service for both?
So the county already has contract control over those services offered to county facilities and APS. And so we have a lot more control and oversight over those systems. And so when we look at, where the opportunities lie, it's within the residential, multifamily, and commercial. And county facilities as well as APS are managed through the county code for multifamily and commercial properties. So they're required to have that recycling system in place, and they're inspected on that 1 year or 3 year interval. And so when we were looking at this, it was really those outside sectors within the community that we wanted to see where the opportunities lie. And so that's why that excludes those facilities right now.
And also, just to add, there's just a data hole. So the reason we have this detailed data is we actually do a hand sort of residential carts every quarter, and then we've done it for multifamily and commercial. We have not, in the recent past, done a hand sort of APS. So we know their total recycling tonnage, but we couldn't tell you how much is paper, and the same is true for county facilities.
Okay, so there isn't data on those two. And the only
Exactly.
reason I ask is I know that the school board has frequently looked at food waste and composting and just understanding programs. And we were looking at this when I was on the board just a few years ago. I don't know what the costs are, and those were always a challenge. So I was just curious the opportunities there. But they're also not included then in any of this data. Is that correct? When we're looking at, like, I think it's slide 10, when we look at combined waste streams and diversion potential, they're not included in that. Oh, it is, sorry. They're not included in all that. None of what you're showing, we don't have data on them because we have not looked through their trash sort to understand what their composition is.
So
and how it would not impact.
we actually do get separate data. So we actually know the county's recycling rate for county facilities and actually from the schools as well. So we have that data separately, but we didn't do a sort like this. It actually parses where the various commodities exist.
Okay.
As Doug said, I think the most important part is we do manage them through the code. So they're subject to the same regulations, meaning they have to have a system in place. The food is a challenge. We've worked with APS, and we got them to convert from styrofoam trays to cardboard trays. The next step is actually, just because of all the packaging that people are doing for all the individual food items in schools, that's just a real challenge. And I think the real step for them is when, if we go with comprehensive organics management, APS will then be subject to that code as well, and they would have to manage organics as part of their school system.
Okay, and then I have another clarifying question.
Sure.
Okay. You asked, can you describe the additional cart fee? So their residences have county carts, they may purchase a secondary cart outside of the county. Is the fee, if the one cart's over, if they, and so my question is like, so I want to know how you're describing that, but also, is it a number of trash? Because there's times where someone may only have one cart, but they still put trash around their cart. So explain to me a little bit
So
about how you.
everybody who's part of the residential system gets 3 carts. And they're
Okay.
typically one recycling cart, one trash cart, and one organics collection cart. They're typically all 64 gallon. We have 32 gallon carts for people in townhouses just because they don't have as much
Right.
room.
Okay.
So that's what they start with. Everybody's also allowed to have up to 2 additional of each style of carts. So they can have up to 3 blue carts, 3 green carts, and 3 black carts.
Okay.
What's happening is people are getting 3 black carts and maybe only 1 blue cart and 1 green cart. And what's happening is a lot of recyclables are going into the waste stream.
Got it.
And so what we're trying to do is disincentivize trash and incentivize green and blue carts. So the fee for the green and blue carts will remain where it is now, which is $2 per month per cart. And we will jack up the price for their trash cart because we want to disincentivize that behavior.
I see. So when they're asking the county for an additional cart, we right now charge $2.
Correct.
What we would be saying is our fee for trash is now $10 because we're
Correct.
hoping you'll divert. So
Correct.
it's just one of our programs, it's not looking at behavior, but in a direct way, but saying. if
We're
you're
indirectly
asking-
trying to
yeah,
incentivize them to do the
directly.
right thing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, let's go to Mr. DeFerranti, and then we'll go to this side.
Thank you very much. First, I think I should say thank you for all the work. You didn't mention the change in the glass market, which totally changed our approach over the last few years. Thank you for the presentation, and boy, this is encouraging. Slide 17, you mentioned education and marketing, and I heard at several points in the presentation, this is the plan and not the proposed budget request. Can you help me a little bit with whether this would go from the general, those 3 positions, 2 or 3 positions would go from the general fund, or whether they would be separate? And thanks, Mark. Sorry to.
No, so these are preliminary ideas. They'll have to go through the budget process, and they would be charged against the solid waste rate. So you could consider those separately. If you, as you remember, last year, the solid waste rate went up a lot. So, and we'll balance that against all the other charges we have in there. But I was comfortable with including these in the presentation because I'm a firm believer that the biggest lever we have is going to be on the education side, given, and I'm going far astray here, given some of the challenges we have, especially with multifamily, where we can't force people to do certain kinds of things we'd like them to do. We have to appeal to their better angels. So there you go.
Great.
I'm going to clarify just one thing. So we have 2 rates we charge. One is the household solid waste rate, where we're targeted to residential. Then we have the multifamily fee, and commercial fee, where we basically, for the inspectors who go and inspect those facilities. As you saw on the slides, most of this needs to be targeted towards the multifamily sector, where they're lagging behind, and that's where the most effort needs to be. So it may not be added to the household solid waste rate, but it may be added to that multifamily commercial fee.
Great.
On the commercial side, we could target to just multifamily.
Great, that's very helpful. I have one more question in total, so I'll go ahead, Mr. Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, everybody gets 2 in this first crack, and then we'll do multiple rounds, so.
So the slides 24 and 25 on the cumulative energy, and I like the symbol, the GHG impacts. Not today, but at some point, it might be helpful for me to understand, as a percentage of our overall carbon, 4% is the county. If you already know that answer, I'm thrilled. I just can't take that and put it into my little head.
So when you did a community energy, sorry, the community energy plan did an analysis of where the greenhouse gases are being generated. So solid waste had 2% of that. And of the 2%, actually 1.6% was the incinerator, our waste energy facility. So just 0.4% is actually collection activities. Again, the 1.6% is associated with the waste energy facility.
Great, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Mr. Karantonis?
So to talk to the first issue, we acknowledge the fact that right now we're inspecting the programs to make sure a program exists. The success of the program for multifamily commercial is something that we just haven't had the resources really to focus on. So again, we're looking for marketing and education. The education would look at what you're talking about, educating the custodial staffs to actually do it well. Because again, people see custodial carts and they'll grab the trash bag and recycling bag and people immediately assume it's all going in the trash. Well, on the back end is actually where they're taking and actually put it in the right spot in many cases, sometimes not. But I do think when we talk about educators, it's focused on who needs the education, how we're going to educate them as well. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity for nonprofits or others to help us with this effort. The county's done a lot of that with Eco Action and other groups to try to facilitate. And again, we don't have that big a staff, and we just need more resources to help us do that. But I do think we are looking at it from an education campaign, not only for the individual resident, but the superintendents of the various facilities, their staffs to be more effective in how they do it. Obviously, we're going to have a big challenge with restaurants because, again, that's where the food waste is being generated. We're going to have to reach out to them to make sure they understand how the systems work most effectively. So again, if it was a restaurant inside of a commercial building, we would treat them as a restaurant. But as a commercial, so if you talk about an office building, they may have a little snack bar somewhere, but again, they're not generating a lot of food waste as far as the facility. But again, it's where the potential grocery store that may be in ground level retail or some other place. So those are things that we'd have to worry about or talk about. But the reality is when we go to a commercial office building and do the audit, that particular building did not have any kind of food establishment in it. And so those numbers are reflecting that building, not indicating that they had any kind of food waste at all. But you're right. If there are small, little stores that sell stuff or a restaurant in the ground level retail, those numbers would change potentially.
Okay, thank you. I will yield.
Thank you. Ms. Garvey?
Yeah, thank you. This is great. I actually would be interested in how we're doing for APS and the county. I'd like to know how we're doing, if we could. I do know, like, I feel kind of bad. We got recycling, we got trash, but we don't have any composting things, and we eat, and I'm kind of wondering what to do with it. So it would be nice to have something. I actually think that, I hope if you end up hiring these people and working, that maybe there's some and maybe you do this already, interviewing people about what do you understand? Because that might indicate what's happening. My own theory is it's a whole lot harder for multifamily people in those buildings to know what to do and where to put it, so it just makes it harder. I'm in Arlington, there's no composting. If I want to do it, I take it over to my daughter's and put it there, which I do sometimes, hoping it doesn't break in the car, and so I don't always do it. Anyway, I can see how it gets harder and harder. So, for example, Arlington, there's no composting, so they're going to need help to do it, I think.
Understand. So what we've done previously, we actually did a personas where we had a consultant come and sort of talk about who actually lives in Arlington. And there are people who have small kids and 2 jobs and just time is their biggest concern. There are other people who are retired, have plenty of time. And so we tried, and also there are the language barriers. There are a whole bunch of challenges to get everybody in Arlington going in the same direction. And you're all aware of that, just trying to communicate your policies broadly. And so we're aware of the challenges there. And so the personas kind of brought it home to us that we're really dealing with a whole bunch of different communities and audiences. And so that's the challenge with our marketing education campaigns. And that's why really we need professionals there who can say, what are the right answers? What are the best approaches for us to actually engage these various communities? Because it really is going to be hard.
It is, and so like my daughter buys the liners for the for the composting, which is great. I haven't got any, so I always snitch them from her and use them.
bring you some.
Revealing way too much here. Well, I'm sure I could get them myself. Ruth's okay with it. But I bet there are a lot of people they don't know that those bags exist. If they got them, they wouldn't know how to use them. And I think it might have been you, Eric, that said put a little, or somebody put paper and put paper towel on the bottom so it doesn't get too wet because otherwise they break. I mean, there are all of these things that they're kind of like secrets that people don't know. So there goes the public education. So I'm just saying, and then I'll get off that hobby horse. But I think there's a lot we could do there because I do think people do want to run the right thing. And have we thought of competitions? So maybe we do, maybe different civic associations and how they're doing, because if we're counting and doing this once a year or quarterly, you could totally see how we were doing, and maybe schools could do, you see where I'm headed.
So one of the things that they've asked for in this is actually a dashboard that kind of reports more routinely on what's going on. And we do waste audits, and we can kind of give a snapshot on a quarterly basis, kind of how people are performing, because we know Monday routes relative to Tuesday, that's how we audit it. And we could sort of source the data that way. It's hard to get very granular down to, Route 51. There are actually 50 collection routes in the county that we perform on a weekly basis. So kind of saying this one, because they're going in the same truck in some cases. That's the challenge we have, but we can, and what we are looking at is how do we get data to the community more broadly and more consistently so they can say, oh, we're doing better, we're not doing better. But that's one of the charges in this plan, is to actually get us to report more frequently to the community to keep them informed. I think that competition piece is something we could actually try to figure out how to do. I know APS did it from just the energy utilization. They kind of did scorecards on an annual basis by facilities, and the county facilities did that as well. It's a little bit harder just because we're putting that material in the same truck, and kind of trying to segregate that gets tough. But we can kind of aggregate it to some degree and see how we're doing. But I think just reporting, saying, did you do better last year than you're doing this year, or this year as opposed to last year, I think that will just help if people know that we're actually making progress.
Yeah, they need to see it, and we need to make it fun, I think. I'll yield for the moment.
Okay, we'll come back and we'll do round 2. Why don't we continue on this theme for a little bit? In terms of the multifamily sector, back to that, Mr. Schwartz, it's probably for you. Have you ever given any thought to maybe including, in terms of negotiated site plan conditions, making sure that some of the impediments that I see to people doing the right thing are removed? For example, a singular chute that's available to someone in a multifamily building, and if they don't use the chute, they have to then, go take their non-trash materials for a separate bin, making sure that they're sort of equity in sort of the ways in which people can dispose of the various products. I know we can't mandate it, but we presumably could negotiate it.
Yeah, I'm going to let Eric take a shot at that one, because I think we've had conversations about this in the past. I will just say that that also promotes exercise, by the way, what you just said. I like that.
Only if people do it.
So there are real challenges in some of the multifamily business or buildings. So what we're looking at, and actually with some of the litter grant money we have this year, we're actually going to get 8 to 10 on-street composting units that we can actually put in front of some pilot areas. We're looking at Roslyn, the multifamily property on Glebe Road across from the Giant. We're also looking in National Landing. And we will put those containers out, and they're really kind of cool because they're going to have an app saying, I want to access this thing, and that when so we don't get contamination and someone who wants to come down. And that can potentially address this problem of, this doesn't work for our building just because we're not set up that way. And so,
Yeah, but I think that is great, but I think your question goes to, like, as we do building design and the site plan
Yeah.
process, and we have conversations,
Yeah.
are there ways to design buildings to incentivize people to do the right thing?
Oh, I know that there are.
I mean, yeah,
Are
and
we interested in?
And I just don't know, and I'm not familiar with,
Incentivize.
we have some things in our site plan conditions that speak to what you have to do in a commercial and residential multifamily building, but don't have specifics on that, so I'm just wondering if we've had conversations about that recently. I don't think
we
I don't
have
think
not.
we have.
And again, I
and we
think-
will.
Yeah, we can. I mean, that's definitely something as far as where we want to go with this thing. Obviously, if we're saying mandate in the future that you will have organics management in your facility, just like we say you have to have trash and recycling, we're going
Right.
to say you have to manage on-site future and organics. I was talking about how we're kind of dealing with the people who are left behind who aren't
Right.
in the future trying to address that. But I think New York City is piloting this. We're going to probably be the first community in the metropolitan area that has these containers to look at.
If I could add, so I mean, we have the specter, so we can't mandate certain things in the commercial sector given where the law stands. And so we have to be careful that we're not essentially doing that through other means. But at the same time, I believe that a lot of our developers are progressive, or at least want to appear progressive. So this would be really important. And there's an opportunity, as I like to say, to shame those who don't do it.
Indeed. Thank you. All right, Ms. Talento.
Just to stay on that thread, when you're piloting these places, are we giving those multifamily residences the bins that you provided to residential?
We haven't thought all that through yet, but we do have bins available still that we could provide in limited quantities. But we just have to think through that. Again, the reality is many people, even though we provided bins, are using their own container. It just works better for them.
Right.
But we would have to work through that and kind of figure out.
The only reason I mention it is that I think access is going to be a big barrier. So education is key, but then providing people the access to be able to do it, right? If you're in a multifamily housing, and especially if you're a family in a multifamily housing, you don't have a lot of space for 3 or 4 trash containers, right? Those little bins are actually more conducive to a multifamily housing than a single-family home because of the space allocations. And a lot of people in single-family homes will obviously use different containers because they have the space for it and they have easy access to an area to dispose of it, where they're coming out at night maybe in their slippers and pajamas to dispose of that. In a multifamily housing, having lived in one, you don't have that, like Christian mentioned, you have that one chute and people put recyclables in the room so other people can use, otherwise it goes in the trash. So just thinking about if you're opening up, I don't want you to do a pilot and say it didn't work and not thinking about people in the apartments who don't have access to type of compostable bin that actually fits in the small allocated kitchen. So, if people are going to do an app to sign up to use that pilot bin, then maybe they by default get a little container that they can put on their thing and then provide a flyer saying, and we're bringing you 20 bags. And I just saw in Giant the other day that they're now selling them. So just when you talk about education, being holistic about understanding who you're educating them and then telling them, asking them maybe in that process, what are your barriers to access? So that's what I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lento. The non-food waste recycling, when I lived 3.5 years ago in multifamily, was the biggest issue and I think I've talked about that. And so that's only anecdotal support. So my only additional point is just to thank you again for the thoughtful plan and the strategic work. It's plenty to do, but a big thank you for the slide deck and the continued sort of systemic way you're approaching it, as well as the FDE's mindful that we have to work on budget, but thank you very much.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you. Mr. Karantonis.
thank you. So I have to say, it's not easy to work with the multifamily, especially the legacy ones, not only because they don't have the appropriate facilities or, the mindset or the organization. It's also a wild market out there in terms of the cost. You can educate a lot, but when the accounts don't square and don't balance, then we have a problem. And moderate and lower income housing will hit these stumbling blocks earlier than others. And as far as I've been observing that in Arlington, the standard procedure is to try to get trash as soon as possible out of apartments, really instantly, almost every day, all of the trash. What nobody wants is that, and that's a problem, an educational and organizational problem. Nobody wants people to manage their trash at home, and delay or otherwise. So this will be a significant challenge, and I see that especially when we have to cross cultural and other barriers here. Two questions that are different here. One is, I do believe that we have a significant, as a nation, as a planet, issue with plastics, microplastics, and management. Where is it appropriate to begin to talk about that in our plan? And where do we establish goals as to quality criteria of how we manage our, the quality of delivery of our recycling partners here? So, for example, there will be companies that recycle plastic in a way that's very responsible, high reuse rates, et cetera. And there will be others who will produce tons of microplastic that nobody really controls, et cetera. So where exactly in the plan should this have a place, or is it appropriate for us to have a place? The second thing is, I really see a couple of issues that come with legislative agenda items for us. One is the issue of supporting bottle bill legislation and extended producer responsibility initiative. I think the world of these. I think that this is where the responsibility should be there. So to reduce packaging and have somebody who's really responsible to take them back and to pay for their fair share for managing this kind of refuse. And the last one is, do you see a point where we say, okay, we applied a plastic bag, a thin wrap plastic bag fee? Do you see a moment where we should say we should stop with that? We should just ban plastic bags. I know that we don't have the jurisdiction yet, but we may want to advocate for that.
Plastics are everywhere.
Yes. So plastics are everywhere. And so within the plan, a lot's going to have to happen at the federal level with the quality, especially with MRFs and the collectors that manage the sorting of plastic materials and the manufacturing of it. So with that, it'll have to be addressed at the federal level. I don't think that there is anything that the county will be able to do at its level to influence or to control the outcome of plastics recycling. But we do have the systems in place that allow us to properly manage plastic pollution, through recycling and through waste to energy. If people utilize those two outcomes with the management of it, it greatly reduces the amount of microplastics or plastic pollution that's going to make its way into our waterways and into the oceans. Would you remind me of your second question, please? Oh, APR.
Plastic bags. The future of plastic bags.
Shall we
and
ban?
whether we should include a aspirational goal of actually discontinuing the use completely.
Well, why don't we help them out? Is there any analysis that you're doing that would help the board better make that decision as to whether to advocate for that? I don't want to put staff in the uncomfortable position of preempting.
So I think that there isn't anything at the moment that we've looked into in that aspect. However, using plastic bags to help with the collection and containment of trash as it's disposed is going to help with the safety of the contractors and with the staff that's doing the hauling. But with the recycling, we do continue to try to educate the residents on not including or not bagging their recyclables. When we look at the waste audits, the plastic films and bags is one of the main contaminants in the recycling stream. When you look at that at weight, it's kind of minimal, but it does have an impact. And so we'll continue on that front. But as far as managing trash, it may be more difficult to ban plastic bags.
Sure, but my first thought was about shopping bags, so not the utility bags, which are replaceable with biodegradable materials.
Surprisingly, that the utilization of plastic bags has not decreased dramatically, even though they put the 5-cent fee in place. And so people are just willing to say, if I need 5 plastic bags, I'm just going to pay the 25 cents. So in the shopping mode, you have a clear alternative. You can use a reusable bag, and that just makes sense. So I think there is going to be some tension as to whether in the future the state makes a decision whether we just ban plastic bags for the packaging of stuff at the retail level. The plastic bags for the collection just makes sense. It's managed because it goes in the waste energy facility, it's incinerated, it makes electricity, that makes perfect sense. But the bag you're talking about on the retail level, there may be some room for people to say, people can modify their behaviors. I mean, I use reusable bags now. Ask me 10 years ago, I'm going, are you crazy? I'm going to get a plastic bag. So we're trainable, we can modify our behavior, especially when it's legislative. So there aren't any plastic bags around. Aldi's doesn't have any plastic bags around. You use a box or you use the card or you do something else. Same with Costco and other places I've shopped. So it can work elsewhere. So I think that really is a policy decision as to whether you want to push the state to do that. But I do think in that realm, people can actually adapt and change their behaviors.
All right, why don't we move to Ms. Garvey, and then we'll do round 3.
Moving to infrastructure. So I'm going to fold a question into a question, I guess. How are we doing on glass? At one point, I thought I'd heard there was a facility in Fairfax, Loudon, that was crushing the glass and turning it into pavement, and we were doing really well because the quality of our glass was really good, and I was feeling proud of Arlington, and we were reusing it. But how are we doing on that? And then I'll get to another question.
So glass recycling within the county is doing really well. It continues to be a very clean recycling stream. Now, the glass that is collected here is taken up to, I think it's Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania.
Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh.
Wow, okay.
Where it's turned into fiberglass insulation and other materials. It's not ground up and used as a road base or asphalt.
Okay,
So,
but it is getting used. And so there is not such a facility in this area, or there is?
So let me just clarify.
Yeah.
We were taking it to Fairfax County because that was the outlet we had at the time. And Fairfax had a crushing plant. And so they would actually make it into aggregate.
Right.
And they would use it on site or haul it to somebody else. But it was not really being truly recycled. It was being downcycled into road-based kind of material. We're also paying $15 a ton. We came across Cap Glass in Pittsburgh, who actually comes down and get it. They provide the truck, and they pay us $15 a ton.
So that
So
works.
we're making money, we're not paying for it, and it is truly now being recycled, whether it be into new bottles or into fiberglass or some other alternative materials, but it is truly being recycled, and so we're very happy about that. And the quality of our glass that are dropped off is very, very clean, and that's why they're very happy to come down here and get it.
All right, well, that's good. People need to know that. It's worth it. We're rinsing out those bottles. Great. So just, and then a follow-on question just on the same thing. I assume with all this plans, because you've got this charm facility and things, that the region maybe needs to be cooperating and coming up with probably Arlington, not so good, not so good to put a facility here. It's a little harder, but there's some of our colleagues, the hinterlands a little bit more have space. So is there a work on that? Is that something maybe COG is working on, or is anything happening with that?
Just leave it on.
The discussion in the region is really about a public MRF and also the composting facilities, which have a limited
Could you remind me what MRF means? There might be thousands listening who won't remember.
material recovery facility. That's where our recyclables go and get sorted and baled for sale on the retail market. The composting facility, when everybody's trying to actually remove organics, I was reading a note today where several mayors have sent a letter to EPA that want to ban organics altogether from not only landfilling, but also incineration. So that, if EPA gets on board driving this federally, will basically do that. But regionally, what we're talking about is composting facilities and material recovery facilities. We haven't engaged on charm facilities yet, but we can do that.
Yeah, because I just think that, we need to get, okay, I'll stop at that point. Wow. Might have one more later.
Thank you. So actually, I had a question on the charm facilities. Can you just describe a little bit what is envisioned? Would this be just like it currently is? People would be able to drop off these materials and you would deal with them however you deal with them?
So there are different processes like deconstruction of mattresses. So we would basically put them on a tractor trailer somehow. We'd collect them in a container and then ship them off. Styrofoam is handled a little bit differently. There are basically styrofoam that heats up and melts it in almost like cow patties and allows you to more efficiently store and just take that stuff away. So we'd manage it. We'd have the collection site, and then we'd basically have third-party vendors who would actually process that material as we collected it, just like for carpet. We'd collect carpet and then send it to somebody who does carpet, recycling. So this would be a collection center, not a processing center.
Right. So I think my question to that is just thinking practically about human behavior. Part of the reason why these things are not only hard to recycle, they're also hard to transport and goes against people's. We hoard electronics because it's easy to stick in a drawer, and then when we have the county event, it's like, oh, I can go and take my electronics and get them recycled. No one's going to do that with a mattress or, with styrofoam. They're going to find the quickest way to get rid of it. And so I'm just, as we think about this, I don't need any sort of responses now. Just let's tie our investments and the amount of effort, marrying it with the way human beings actually operate. And another question, I think, along that regard, some of the success that we have in the residential, the non-multifamily residential side, I think to some degree is influenced by people being governed by having other eyes watching them. You see kind of like what your neighbors are doing. You see it's the sort of keeping up with the Joneses phenomenon in terms of doing good things. And that doesn't exist to the same degree in a multifamily building. And so to whatever extent we can think about shaming people to do the right thing, in addition to the inducements and the encouragements, I think that also plays a big factor.
And just the other factor is just the transient nature of multifamily. The turnover is just much higher.
Right.
And so that's probably the biggest thing, because again, we do a good job with a single-family residential of educating. We're giving you quarterly handouts, telling you, hey, here's what's going on, please do this differently. And we just don't have the same reach into the multifamily sector. So
If I could just insert myself, because I asked this question when I was getting the pre-briefing on this, I said, we live in like a gig economy. Hasn't somebody gone out and done like an app for mattresses to pick them up? I mean, instead of a charm facility, which may be perfectly fine, where are those kids from college with their truck going around picking up mattresses? So what's the answer?
So when this question came up, we talked about glass, and there is a young entrepreneur who's actually started a business here in Arlington where he'll come to your house and he'll collect your glass and take it to one of our drop-off centers. And he's doing quite well.
I bet he is.
I think that's a great idea.
I think there are some ways that we can try to incentivize collection programs, because I think your point is well taken, that if it's hard, people aren't going to do it. And so our system has been built in the residential to make it as easy as possible. we don't have the same reach in multifamily, so we have to be creative about these different opportunities and different options. I mean, there are different, private groups that come to you and say, I'll collect stuff from your house. The Purple Heart and other groups like that will do that. And whether or not we can basically incentivize someone to do that for us, to deal with the materials we want dealt with, that might be a viable alternative instead of building a facility, which is expensive on limited land here in the county. So we can look at different options.
Thank you. Ms. Talento.
Thank you. And just speaking of that, there is an actual compost service that does that because we used it. And I don't know if they're servicing multifamily units, but it would go to Christian Singh where, when you're multifamily, when you're heading to the elevator, you walk by 5 doors. And if 3 of them have a little compost bin out for their swapping day, right? But, I know that's in the future. I think we're heading that direction, but I think that there's opportunities there to explore it in the multifamily sector as well. My question was about zoning regulations. Can you explain a little bit, the legislative regulations? I recognize that you're looking to adopt a plan before pushing this, but we do have a legislative package coming up, and some of these I think are kind of basic and don't need exploration, like the producer responsibilities. I'm not familiar with them, but I can sort of deduce what organic spottle bill might look like. Can you talk to me a little bit about how zoning regulations would have an impact on this plan and however that is?
So with that in particular, it's really about the siting of collection containers or things within the right-of-way, such as the compost containers that Eric was talking about for the pilot program, siting of glass collection containers within the Roslyn Ballston and National Landing. It's making sure that the current zoning regulations allow that without the administrative burden of going through all of those hoops as we look to do that. And so making it just a little bit easier to site and place additional collection for those materials throughout the community.
Okay, so this is just for county, not necessarily commercial focus, but we have to get, I guess it's difficult to get permits for putting the Quincy Park piece. Is that what you're talking about, like locations like that?
Yes, having lived through this in the past, as some of the board members have, everybody wants additional places to take their recyclables, except for the people who live right next to it, don't want it anywhere near them. So that's the problem. So that we have
so many things.
Yeah, we have to balance that out, but that's what's involved.
But at the state level, there's
Yeah,
things that make it a little more difficult for us to.
At the state level, and I'm not the expert on this, but I know, for example, there are some states that have the supplier obligations on the part of manufacturers. I think Maine is one of them, and California has looked at that, essentially where companies would no longer produce products that have a lot of things that need to go through the recycling process. That would require action by the General Assembly. So I think that's probably, it could happen, but I'm not optimistic it'll happen anytime soon.
And EPR bills, they've been introduced every session for the last 5 years, and they just don't go anywhere. Richmond looks to be moving in the other direction. They did have a extended polystyrene ban, so styrofoam, and they just kicked it out another 5 years. It was supposed to take effect next year, and they kicked it down the road 5 more years. So these bills are not getting a whole lot of traction, but they're being introduced, so.
All right, thank you, that's helpful, appreciate it.
All right, Ms. Garvey.
Yeah. It took plastic bags a long time. They got introduced a whole lot, and we did finally get at least a charge. Just the persistence does pay off. Small budget question. So it's really interesting. I saw the FTEs, and you had short-term, and I thought, oh, so it's short-term, so we could do one-time funding. It's just going to hire them for it. And then I realized, oh, no, that means that they want them in the short term. But if it's for education and such, I would assume that we're trying to change people's behaviors and activities, and once you actually accomplish that, you might not need the same effort. In other words, it's a big push. Might some of these positions be able to be sort of short-term, even pilot-like, to see how they do, and maybe you don't need as many once they're successful?
I would submit that may not be true. I think you need to be constantly educating, reinforcing, because again, especially multifamily where there's such transient and turnover, you just have to keep at it. Just like even the residential sector, we slip back, between, times we educate on certain topics. So I do think, unfortunately, that it's one of these things that once you start, you have to continue to gain momentum and stay engaged with the various people through just a long-term investment.
So maybe, I get it, I understand that. I do think that once you get to a certain point, it's repetition, so you don't have to reinvent the, you see what I'm saying? I
Right.
think, because, we're talking, I'm talking about competition, we're talking about all kinds of different things here to come up and figure out a plan. That's one push. Once you've got something that you're then implementing, and it kind of goes on of itself, you might not need as much. That's just all I'm suggesting
That's
there.
probably true. Just the challenge there is just stay honest. So if you've been doing something for a couple of years, does it lose its focus and messaging and people stop hearing it and then it'll start over. So I think there's a whole bunch of competing aspects of that. But I do think, again, once you start and you demonstrate success and people buy in, you can throttle back a little bit. But my concern is that because, again, the transit nature of the multifamily, it's just an ongoing challenge to make sure everybody is doing what they need to be able to do.
Okay, I'm just going to toss that out as an idea, because we're coming up against a tough budget year. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Karantonis.
Very similar, Mr. Chair, to, it's a follow-up to Ms. Garvey's question on the budget. So in slide 27, where you lay out the short-term, medium-term, so there is expansion, education, outreach, fiscal year 25, approximately $369,000. You said that this can be, this can be expanded, et cetera. But actually, the way I understand that, this is a number that, and if we start an FTE there, will go in every budget year following that. So this will be kind of a permanent investment in education follow-up with our customers here. Right?
So that includes 2 FTE. So once you hire an FTE, that salary is each and every year into the
Exactly.
future.
So this is just the initial.
Well, no, it would be that same money each and every year because built in that 369 is programmatic money to do campaigns and buy materials. So
I'd just
that-
like, yeah,
Karantonis is noting that the chart just shows the initial year of implementation, doesn't
Right.
cost it out.
right.
Yeah,
We-
and then-
We hid those numbers just to confuse you, but they would be there.
Yeah, it's, 200, it is 300,000 for 2 FTEs plus. I get that. But this means that we will be committing that then every
Ongoing
year.
basis.
And you explained the revenue stream that will be supporting that as well.
Potentially.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. DiVerenti?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the last 2 questions on the budget, because I asked a little earlier, and I had been under the impression the impact on our residents of an increase in the solid waste fee is there. We're not sure yet whether under the existing solid waste fee, these 2 FTEs could be absorbed and not result in
Well,
an increase?
there's a couple of things. One is, and Eric made reference to the fee, we also charge our multifamily inspection fees, which is another way to support these. So we have to go back, and we're doing that right now, recalibrating. There are some other things that are happening. For example, I think we're a year away from getting a zero tip fee, which means that we'll be paying 0 to deliver our trash, and then we can recover some of that fee and redirect it. So I'm optimistic that we'll be able to make additional investments here. But I also, I think I pick up on the point, which is they could be ongoing costs, and your point, Libby, that maybe, those people that we hire may not be the right people to have in a couple of years because we might want them to have a different skill set. So we need to keep all of that in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just ask a question about the Covanta facility and schools. I realize we don't do the same level of auditing of the schools' waste streams to figure out what's the diversion potential, but just in terms of overall impact, do we have a sense of how much of the capacity that we're using at Covanta is coming from APS? Do we calculate tonnage or anything else?
I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but APS, it's a very, the slide, Covanta is roughly 360,000 tons of capacity a year. APS maybe uses 2,000 or 3,000 tons. It's very small compared to the overall capacity. Countywide, we delivered about 88,000 tons last year that's countywide to Covanta. So again, APS is.
So the county is 88, APS is roughly 2 of that, and Covanta.
88 is All the
everything, multifamily,
Right.
commercial, like everything that could be affiliated with Arlington County that went to Covanta.
So with Covanta being at 98% capacity, is Alexandria producing more than we are? Are they accepting trash from others?
They're taking a DC, I think, contributed maybe 40,000 tons. Some's
Got it.
bleeding over from Fairfax, Alexandria. There's even some weird places. I think North Carolina somehow got 40 tons in there. Pennsylvania.
I
It's
was-
just
West Virginia.
odd stuff.
Adam
yeah.
did not mean to imply North Carolina is weird. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, it's an odd location to use our facility because
Yeah.
there's many landfills between here and North Carolina. But yeah, anyway, so.
Thank you for that, because the math was not mathing for me, as the saying goes. That's interesting. Interesting, yeah. You know, I'll say it again, it's not a surprise. Talked about it with our APS colleagues. I have two people who regularly report on the operational status of what goes on in APS, and I think there's lots of opportunity there to support some operational sustainability initiatives. Obviously, APS does a great job when it comes to design of their buildings and everything else. What I think is a little bit lacking is bringing some of those very progressive, high-minded principles to the operations of the school. So just putting that out there as an area of growth.
So can
So I'll just make the comment, we actually have the data from APS because we help manage the contract. They have a separate contract, but under the contract that we let. So we know county facilities from trash and recycling, we know APS facilities. Excuse me, from trash and recycling. So we have the data, what their general recycling rates are. So we know that, and we try to work with them to improve things. Again, I think the biggest challenge they have is most of their weight is probably organics, meaning food that they generate throughout breakfast and lunch and sometimes in the afternoons. And it's challenging with the way their kitchens are designed. They're retrofitting some of their schools currently. They're still not even trying to really, how do we go the next step? But the challenge, it's still a challenge. I mean, their focus is educating the children, and this is a secondary issue, but it's something that's important, and they probably could do
Yeah, I remain convinced, it's not just, just as last editorial comment before turning it over, it's not even just the sort of impact within the schools. Remember, each of those students goes home. And if their practices at school can influence their practices at home, or what they, annoyingly pester their parents to do at home, those are opportunities of great growth. Yeah, that's it. Nothing like the shame from your children to make adults do the right thing. All right, enough pontificating.
Yeah,
Ms. Gardner.
so I was going to pick up right there. That was the point I was going to make, because when you're talking about educating, you could send kids home, and talking to their parents. If we're trying to change a culture, that's where we want to start. So I think that would be great. And just again, on the education, I'll go back. So thank you for the handout. Thank you for this presentation. I have always found these subjects fascinating. There is not a crowd here. For some reason, this doesn't attract solid waste, just doesn't always draw people, but it's fascinating. And I think people do find it fascinating. I send out a little monthly newsletter, and I included a video clip, and I'm forgetting now what it was. It was a DES clip, I think. I'm going to send it out to everybody, because someone wrote back and said, that was great. That was really interesting. You need to have your staff do it on, I think it was maybe CPHD. I'll pass on what the recommendation is. But yeah, people, when you really show how it works, people are really interested, I think. So I think there's a lot to do here. I think it's fun, and I think the more people understand, the better, because these are big budget numbers, and much of what you do is hidden. And in fact, we want it that way, because if, we know that the water system's not working, or what you're doing isn't working, we're in a world of hurt. But that doesn't mean it isn't interesting, and we need to find a way to kind of get it in front of people a little bit, so they understand why we're spending this money, and actually the important and really important work that you do, and maybe attract younger people to get into the field, because I think that's an issue too that you're facing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Talento, and then Mr. Carantonis.
So I just want to close my comments out, and first, thank you for all the work that you've done. I know we had a lot of questions today, but I think it's so important to note how far our county has come, in that we know it's not enough, and we're continuing to look forward and try to reach that aspirational goal that you actually have a plan that gets us really close, if not there. So just thank you for that work. And again, I just want to highlight that as you're going out here and exploring creative ways, that you're really just making sure you're also asking, what's your barrier to accessibility, right? We have these programs, here are the locations, here's what we're producing, here's the education. tell us why you're not able to do it. Because I think you'll find a lot of information that there are people who actually want to, they may not know how. And then once they know how, they may not have access. And that way, when you're growing your program, you can really look at that. I think that's a thing. And then I will say for APS, having been there recently, sustainability was one of their strategic plan goals. They did a lot of work for the paper recycling and really educating kids on that, and even at the cafeteria trying to do that. I think the biggest opportunity we have there is the compostable items, and it goes back to what you were saying. They are educating the student. They've had science classes, and they've had to talk about FTEs bringing in to educate that. So I think really, if you are helping them manage a contract, is there a contract that makes composting for a system like the school easy for them to access, where then all they're supplementing is bins and using their science to educate. Just, that's not, you're right, they're not going to be looking at that. But if you all are looking at that and you're helping down a contract, maybe there's an opportunity there, because the interest is in there. They've made investments. They were looking to increase FTEs when I was there, and we had to do cuts. And then the pandemic hit. So just being thoughtful about, I think that's where the golden opportunity is, and with your expertise and understanding what's out there, there might be an opportunity there. So thank you.
Mr. Carantonis.
I want to align with my colleague, Mr. Lento, thanking you for all the work. I have to say, I take that extremely seriously, and it makes me think a lot about, major deliverables in our community. One of this is actually waste avoidance. So how can we not even get to the 251,000? I don't consider it a huge accomplishment that with increasing population, we have also an increasing pile of waste, even if we are doing a far better job in managing that, separating that, etc. For me, the holy grail is how do we don't get there? How do we need less management because we produce just less waste? And less problematic waste that is very, difficult to manage and to, and it's expensive and needs, continuous education campaigns, etc. So for me, this is an ongoing struggle and an ongoing place where policy will have to play a big role, and also persuasion, not only education. Persuasion has also other things. We have to be able to say to people, no, you have to go to your neighbors, to your tenants, and you have to be able to focus on more than just efficiently get the stuff out of the way, as it is done very often today. So thank you for that. It's a very good start, and I think that we will have a very productive community dialogue that starts tomorrow, as I understand that, right? So
Thank you very much.
Indeed, and to conclude, let me just add my thanks to the work. This is fascinating. One of my earliest recollections of joining the board was joining my colleague, Ms. Garvey, out at the Covanta facility, and I can attest she did find it quite fascinating. It was a great time. But this work is extremely important for all the reasons that colleagues have mentioned, and it's fascinating because this is one of the public policy areas where truly changes, reforms are needed at every level, from the big federal government down to the individual household, and getting those all to work in alignment with our goals is a true challenge. But I have a lot of faith in our team, because what we've done in Arlington is enviable. And, I hope that we can continue not only the good results, but also the good innovation that helps us even advance the ball a little bit further. The only thing that I'll just point out in closing, the diversion goal, 2038. This is akin, in my opinion, to our 2050 carbon neutrality goals. This is a big deal. And what it means in real terms is that in the next 5 years, we need to improve our diversion rates by north of 20%, and then the 5 years after that by 25%, and the 5 years after that by another 20%. This is not easy to do at all, so I just don't want anybody to think that this is one of those, they're coming up with a plan to make what they're already going to do look good. No, this is a lift, and we need the community to help. We need our great groups like C2E2 to help. We need Arlington Public Schools to help, and we need the legislature to help as well. So with that, thank you all. We appreciate it. Happy Halloween. All right.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I'd now like to move us into a closed session. So I move that the county board convene a closed meeting as authorized by Virginia Code Sections 2.2, 3711A7 and 29 for consultation with the county attorney regarding actual and probable litigation where such consultation or briefing an open meeting would adversely affect the litigating posture of the county board, and discussion of the award of a contract involving the expenditure of public funds where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining and negotiating position of the county board. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Vice Chair Garvey. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it, 5-0. The board's now in closed session.